That is the result you could achieve on your very first miniature. In this video, I will guide you through all the steps to paint your very first miniature, using only the Games Workshop starter set and the Space Marine from this starter set. Just like if you were starting painting today. So together we will see the assembling, undercoating, painting and obviously basing, so that you can have the best possible first miniature. All Warhammer miniatures are sold on sprues, with corresponding bases. In your starter paint set you will find clippers. It will allow you to separate the parts of the miniature from the sprue. You will also find a shorter version of this tool, which is a mold line remover. We will see how to use it just after cutting. Always place the flat side of your clippers on the part you want to cut. If you don't, you will have too much sprue left on your miniatures. In the case of the miniature from the starter box, you have many pegs that are used to assemble the miniature without glue. You must be careful not to cut them. The sprue stem is always thinner where you need to cut. Once you have cut everything, with the mold line remover, you can scrape off the excess parts that may have remained on the miniature. Then, simply assemble the pieces following the provided instructions. Personally, I glue the Mini out of habit, but as I said, they are designed to be assembled without glue. These miniatures are called easy to build or push to fit. The vast majority of Warhammer miniatures are not like this, and you will need glue, but in the case of starter kits, it's good without glue. Next, once your miniature is assembled, you will need to prime it. The primer is essential. It's on this layer that your paint will adhere, providing a uniform coating. Games Workshop primers are quite expensive. I recommend going to your Warhammer store or retailer to ask them to prime your miniature for free, using their spray. So, priming is not difficult. Several light sprays at about 20 or 30 centimeters away from the miniature. And most importantly, be careful not to put too much. It could clog the details, which is why I recommend a black primer to start. It covers way better than a white primer. Always prime outdoors, and if possible, wear gloves. You are now ready to move on to painting. You will need the brush and paints from the Games Workshop kit, as well as a water container. A glass works perfectly, and if you have something to use as a palette, that's better. It prevents your paint from drying in the pot and becoming unusable after about 10 painting sessions. We are going to paint this Space Marine in blue. That's how the Ultramarines are. A chapter of Space Marines that is heavily featured by Games Workshop. So, take the Macrack blue to make the first layer of your Space Marine. We will dilute the paint by dipping our brush in water before remixing the paint on your palette. Diluting allows for a thinner layer. It covers less well and we will need to do a second layer. But it doesn't fill the recesses. Believe me, it clogs up faster than you think. And it completely ruins the details of your miniature. While we are doing our first layer, you might be thinking that the paint spot names are very strange. And it's true. All these names are directly inspired by the Warhammer universe's lore. For example, Macrack blue is the official blue for the Ultramarines, because their planet is called Macrack. In your set you also have Abaddon Black. That's him, Abaddon, and he is in a black armor. So, if you are a little bit curious, you can literally Google all the names of your paints. So, you see, once dry, the blue layer is not very uniform, but it's thin. We will take more blue, dilute it again, and make a second pass to get a thin and opaque blue. And yes, if you're wondering, two well-done thin layers are finer and cleaner than one too thick layer done poorly. Once dry, we get this result. It's clean, it covers exactly what we are looking for. Now that we have our base layer, we will move on to the other areas that will not be blue. We will base almost all the other parts in Abaddon black, so that we can use this black for some shadows. So all the armor gaps, the weapon, or even the exhaust pipes on the backpack. Just like with the blue, we dilute the black slightly and do 2 thin layers if necessary. If you haven't overflowed much onto the black areas, 1 layer will probably be enough. Next, we will tackle the metallics with lead batcher. We will not dilute metallic paints to maintain a slightly pasty appearance. Metallic paints are more vicious. To achieve a nice metallic effect without losing the natural shading of Abaddon black, we will gradually brush the areas of the miniature that we want to paint in metallic. It's better to take your time to paint the area than to cover the recesses. If you do this step correctly, you won't need to apply shades on the metal later. Now let's move on to gold. Personally, I would have preferred to have Retributor armor in the box, but they gave us Balthazar gold. It's less yellow and less shiny, but it works anyway. We will paint in gold the shoulder pads borders, the Aquila on the chest and on the weapon, the entire perfected top of the Pyre Blaster, as well as the skull on the tank. Now we only have a few details left to do before moving on to the shades. We will paint the parchments in Wraith Bone. You will probably do 2 or 3 slightly diluted layers. White is a somewhat tricky paint to apply, but with patience and precision you will achieve a good result. Then, with Mephiston Red, we will paint the wax holding these parchments and the helmet lenses. To paint the lenses, I recommend using a small amount of paint on the tip of your brush, gripping on the miniature firmly, joining your 2 hands to avoid shaking, and if necessary, placing your hands on the desk. Once you are sure you are not shaking, go slowly and carefully. Not that if you overflow, it's okay, you can just repaint the area in blue. Magic! There you go! You finished all the base layers. You can already be proud of yourself. And you could even stop here if it was difficult for you. It's often better to play with painted miniatures, but it's supposed to be enjoyable and not an obligation. However, if you enjoyed it so far, we can further increase the painting level by moving on to shading with the shade. You only have 1 pot of shade and it's Agrax Earth Shade. Yours is smaller than mine, but that's because I didn't buy the pack. I already had everything, and the shades are sold separately in larger sizes. So the shade for white, red and gold is quite simple. We will dip the brush into the pot and apply the paints all over the color. To darken the blue, we could do the same, but you will have a huge step of fixing the blue right after. Instead, we will focus on being precise and apply the paint only in the recesses. Doing this will highlight all the shapes of the miniature. You will see once dry. Try to be as precise as possible by putting shade in all the armor recesses. And as before, don't worry if you overflow. I also overflow, and you just need to go back with diluted Macrec blue to get back to the base color. Now your miniature is shaded, and the details stand out thanks to that. Now we can move on to the highlighting step to accentuate all of this even more. We'll start slowly by going back with Mephiston Red on the edges of the wax parchment and on the lenses if you feel like it. Then, for the blue, I was bothered. I wanted to highlight it with Thunderhawk blue, which is given in the box. Unfortunately, it doesn't work. It doesn't highlight anything at all. To tell you the truth, I usually use Thunderhawk blue in my black highlights, so I didn't have much hope, but I still wanted to try. So I'm sorry, but you have to make your very first mix on your palette. It's really not hard, don't worry. You take a quantity of Macrec blue with your brush that you try to remember. You put it on your palette and you clean your brush completely. Once it's clean, you try to take the same amount of paint from the Corax white pot and you put it on your palette just next to the blue. You dip your brush back into the water without necessarily cleaning it, just to add water to the mix and dilute it a little bit more. And you mix it all. You will get a much lighter blue. And with this blue, we will make lines on the edges of the blue armor. It's long and you need to be focused, just like with the lenses earlier. Be sure to join your hands well and lean on your desk for stability. You can also use the edge of your brush when possible, it's much easier. Remember, don't overload your brush with paint. Of course, don't worry if you overflow. You go back with the initial color and it's fixed. And there you go, the painting of your first miniature is finished! Congrats! Now you need to make its base to represent it on the battlefield. For that, there is texture paint in your kit. I don't have it, but I have a much larger equivalent because it's much cheaper, and cheaper is better. But don't worry, it's exactly the same thing. Texture paint is paint mixed with small plastic balls, and that's what will give a sand effect. Apply it carefully, trying not to get it on your miniature feet. Once you have applied your texture well, you can wait for quite some time, at least 10 good minutes for it to dry. Make sure it's dry before moving on to the next step. So it's time to have a drink, make a coffee, or whatever. Then we will darken the texture so that it will look less like a big yellow clump and more like earth. For this, a good dose of Airbrush Earthshade all over, and again, we wait for it to dry fully. With Airbrush Black, you can paint the outline of your base if it's not clean. Once it's dry, we will do something like a dry brush with your brush. If by any chance you have a dry brush, it looks like this, use it. Otherwise, you put your paint down and wipe your brush on the paper towel so that there is a little bit paint left on it. Then you will lightly brush, as with the Leadbetter earlier, the surface of the texture. The paint will cling to the tops and lighten them, so you will have a very nice effect for your base. And there you go! The painting of your very first miniature is finished! Don't put too much pressure on yourself if you don't have a result like mine. I've been painting for 10 years. I can paint like this to give you an idea. But don't forget that my first miniatures was this one. Well, I was 9 years old, so well. A better example would be this Chaos Lord that I repainted about 10 years ago. I was 20 years old and studying to become a dental technician. I knew how to use my 10 fingers, basically, but it's not necessary to paint well. What I mean is that most of the time, painting is not innate, it is learned. And all you need is the desire to improve and love painting. When I painted the Chaos Lord, there were almost no painting tutorials on YouTube. You're lucky because this channel will have many for you. Subscribe! If you're not subscribing, I'm crying!